Joining us is Olga Kunosova, Secretary of the Russian Opposition Forum in support of Ukraine. Welcome, Olga.
Hello.
Good morning.
Olga Vladimirovna, could you tell us, how would you assess, I'm not sure if we can say in general, are there contacts happening there? They probably do exist. Yes, but what about the negotiations themselves? What stage are they at? And also, I don't know, how can the parties actually reach decisions that are truly capable of untying, at least for now it seems so, this Gordian knot?
Well, after all, Kirilo Budanov tells us that negotiations are underway and even that they are proceeding successfully. In this case, I trust him more than anyone else. He is definitely someone who is very well acquainted with the course of the negotiations. As for Russia, the truth is that Russia is at an impasse. Resources are running out and the economy is in very bad shape. And so, well, I don't know who in Putin's inner circle doesn't understand that the war absolutely needs to be brought to an end as soon as possible. Except maybe the most extreme hardline ones like Yuri Kovalchuk and Sergei Kirienko. But I think everyone else is already trying to somehow hint to the aging or already old dictator or the cardboard Führer, yes, Apple, that it is finally high time to end this. Why cardboard? Well, as you rightly said, above all, he fears for his own life. That's why, as they say, the Tsar is not real, the Führer is cardboard.
Olga Vladimirovna, then another question. Look, if we're talking about resources running out, this is confirmed by Latvian intelligence, as well as by obvious facts and the official information about the state of the economy in the Russian Federation. At the same time, the State Duma of the Russian Federation, in its first reading, supported a bill that expands Putin's powers to use the army outside the country. This was reported by Interfax. The document allows the use of armed forces abroad for the so-called protection of the rights of citizens of the Russian Federation, including in cases of arrest or criminal prosecution of Russians. It also concerns situations related to decisions by foreign courts or international bodies that Moscow does not recognize. This same initiative was introduced against the backdrop of warnings from Western intelligence agencies about a possible escalation and increased risk of conflict within Europe itself. However, it should be noted that experts point out that the bill could expand the legal framework for Russia's external military operations. If there are no resources left to continue the war and no desire to enter into negotiations, then how exactly do they plan to defend themselves? With what forces and with what means? Or is this perhaps a move for the future? Or is it just to reassure their own domestic audience? Why has this bill appeared right now, in your opinion?
Actually, no, that is not the case. These are stories that completely and fundamentally contradict each other. Because if Putin really is forced to stop in the Ukrainian direction, he will be able to liberate a vast amount of military resources to jump somewhere else, yes. And he needs, first and foremost, to convince himself that he is still just as powerful and fearsome and that everyone should still be afraid of him. And naturally, he also needs to provide reassurance to the domestic population about just how much of a powerful giant he still is. And in this specific sense, for example, a potential attack on Estonia doesn't seem all that unexpected as it might perhaps appear at first glance. Here he has the clear opportunity to pause, and it's certainly no coincidence that talk about the Narva People's Republic has started up again, as they say, to stir up the topic, right? The goal would be to quickly seize some territory within Estonia, pardon the tautology, and say, see, we're still winning. This strategy is designed to demonstrate strength and maintain momentum in the region. At the same time, it would also deal a serious blow to NATO's unity.
And what could potentially exert influence over this so-called negotiation tactic or strategy of the Kremlin? Furthermore, we must ask ourselves what exactly needs to be done so that meaningful and substantive changes actually happen, so that they genuinely begin to look at things much more realistically and actually engage in negotiations, perhaps even trying to arrive at a mutually acceptable kind of compromise or agreement.
It seems to me that the most important factor is Ukrainian long-range missiles. It's no coincidence that the situation with the parade on May 9th is becoming very strange. It's unclear whether it will be held in Moscow and St. Petersburg or if it won't happen at all. And the only reason this question arises is once again the plywood Führer's fear for his own life. Because over there, after all, quite unlike those elderly, very elderly Soviet leaders of the past who still somehow managed to climb up onto the high mausoleum and stand there firmly for the entire duration of the parade, the current leaders are simply unable to stand for that long. They actually have to sit down on little chairs placed on some kind of temporary plywood stage that has been set up right in front of the mausoleum. And if the older structures could, if it became absolutely necessary, hide behind the thick granite parapet, here there is no granite parapet at all. So if anything happens, yes, if a Ukrainian missile flies in or some loyalist box turns toward Shoigu and suddenly fires at Putin from a heavy tank, then absolutely nothing will be left behind.
Recently, there have been more and more statements from Z bloggers appearing online who are starting to express outrage about the situation at the front, openly talking about the meat grinder that's happening, about liquidation and destruction taking place there. They are even calling the war a war now, admitting mistakes, and even pointing them out. Yes, some bloggers are being arrested, but this is appearing more and more frequently online. To what extent could this indicate that a certain information special operation is underway and that some FSB circles or Putin's elite are preparing to enter into negotiations bypassing Putin himself and, let's say, not a palace coup, but a reshuffling of power in the Russian Federation, not changing the regime, but changing, so to speak, the main players? How do you...
Well, personally, I tend to believe that, after all, this is not really so much of an information special operation, but rather just a case of steam escaping from a tightly covered pot. Because, after all, the Z bloggers are openly voicing the thoughts that arise there, right on the front lines. And yet, even so, of course, the Kremlin may not be strategic geniuses, but they're not idiots either, and they can't help but fully recognize and understand that the situation at the front is looking more and more like what transpired during World War I before the revolution. If they don't try to orchestrate a palace coup, they might end up sparking a widespread revolution, mind you. After all, it wasn't just Remeslo, an absolutely pro-government blogger who unexpectedly began to criticize Putin and then went off to a psychiatric hospital for a break. One has to wonder exactly how much further this situation can possibly go. The criminal Gubarev, in his interview with Dad, even started telling us that Putin isn't real, that he's just a utility, and that he's actually controlled by some kind of global backstage powers. And that's why all this continues and the war is going very badly. Yeah, it would seem that even such absolutely pro-government people are starting to say things like this. Well, yes, it kind of hints at something.
Tell me, Olga Vladimirovna, if we're talking about the emergence of these dissenting voices in various interviews, how do you see this? Are these people speaking out on their own, or is someone in one way or another allowing them to say these things? And what could serve as a clear indication that, in fact, these messengers who appear here and there in a variety of interviews are not only, as you said, letting off a certain amount of steam, but are also, let's say, serving a vital informing function, showing that not all the Kremlin's handlers are looking at the development of events in exactly the same way as Putin and perhaps his closest circle of associates?
Well, I have to say, after all, Gubarev has been trying to say something for quite a while now. If we look back to when Strelkov, also known as Gherkin, was first arrested, he was already planning to lead some of his disgruntled patriots somewhere, but Gherkin's wife was firmly against it. And in fact, that's why there is nothing particularly new here, but perhaps the real novelty is that Gubarev is now even openly questioning Putin's own agency. So, of course, it is all rather amusing how it sounds to us now. Well, yes, that is true. But this means that such conversations are definitely taking place, at least in the corridors. And undoubtedly, there are some, well, again, we remember it was written that a very large number of go-betweens have appeared in America, actively trying to negotiate. So if some kind of specific diplomatic negotiation setup or a strategic configuration suddenly turns out to be workable in this environment, I certainly wouldn't rule out the possibility that internally, well, maybe not a full-blown military coup, but some significant internal movement that tries to push, move, or completely sideline Putin could very well emerge. Although you would naturally think that Shoigu should be the very person to keep an eye on, especially since almost everyone else in the high command has already been arrested, and he is clearly the next logical person in line. It really makes you wonder and ask yourself, Does he truly have no loyal soldiers or dedicated supporters left at all to stand by him now? Whether in the army, he was defense minister for quite a long time, or in the Ministry of Emergency Situations, Sergei Kuzhugetovich, come on, wake up, or else they'll come to saw your door down at 6 in the morning.
And as for dragging out the negotiation process and these narratives we keep hearing, sometimes from Peskov, sometimes from some other high-ranking official, about how first let's deal with Iran. We're ready, but Trump is busy. And after all, at the same time, the special envoy of the US President, Steve Witko, is planning to come to Ukraine, and this will be the first time. How strong is this signal, and how do you think it was interpreted in the Kremlin? We literally have just 1 minute of airtime left.
Well, I think the Kremlin read the signal correctly, and they understand that they need to negotiate. Oh, otherwise things will only get worse. But I think there should be some kind of movement, some kind of progress. The main thing is to look in all directions and understand that as long as Putin is in power, it is not worth thinking about a long-term peace.
Olga Vladimirovna, thank you for the conversation and for joining our morning broadcast. Thank you. Let me remind you that we were joined by Olga Kurnosova, Secretary of the Russian Opposition Forum in support of Ukraine.